Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. That way, YouTube will keep showing you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. I am Adam, 32 years old. I live alone in a modest apartment in Yuma, Arizona. I work as a blog writer. The content I write usually revolves around life stories, experiences about a dish or a travel destination. After a while of working hard, my blog has gained a lot of attention and support. But gradually, I ran out of ideas for topics and content to write about. I realized it was time for a change in both the content and the type of stories. I conducted a survey on my blog about the topics they were interested in and wanted me to write about. The majority of comments and suggestions came in for me to write short horror stories. This is truly a genre that was very new to me. I had no interest in horror, whether in fictions nor films. But to please my loyal readers, I decided to challenge myself this time. Since it was a completely new genre and not my strong suit, I spent a lot of time researching. I shifted entirely to reading horror stories and watching horror films. The initial days were quite difficult for me. When reading stories, I would remember the horror details and then imagine a dozen other tales. Each time, like so, I ended up scaring myself, feeling frightened and panicked when I was alone. The hallmark of horror films is that mysterious characters or spirits suddenly appear in hidden and dark places. I became so obsessed with this idea that I imagined an evil entity ready to pounce from any corner of the house if I wasn't cautious. Gradually, I developed a habit of scanning around whenever I entered any new space, especially dark corners. When watching horror films, I would turn on all the lights in the house, hug my pet dog, and hold the remote tightly to shut off the TV at any moment. Although I was obsessed and terrified, it was indeed a very effective way for me to approach this genre. It also brought me an abundance of inspiration. My first stories were published on the blog. The readers seemed to enjoy them, complimenting and encouraging me to continue. I gradually found myself loving this genre and wanting to gain more experience. I read more books on spirituality, thrillers, and horrifying murder cases to gather more ideas for building interesting scenarios and stories. My imagination became increasingly richer. With just one image, a tiny detail, or a leading sentence, I could make it a horror story. I even carried out challenges or spiritual games to gain real experiences and authenticity for each of my story. Gradually, my life became more and more chaotic, and had my living space always carried a gloomy atmosphere. I began to view everything with a horror gaze, imagining terrifying scenarios. The friendly smile of the cashier at the supermarket would also make me panic. And I might have seen a ghost. Maybe. I wasn't sure. I first saw it when I woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It appeared right behind me as I was looking in the mirror and vanished in an instant. I couldn't see its features clearly. It seemed to have no eyes, just two deep black sockets. I thought I was just scaring myself again, so I brushed it off and went back to bed. The second time was when I was awake at night reading a story. I tossed and turned in bed, reading about a lurking spirit in the narrative. Suddenly, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I swear I could feel someone's breath on the back of my neck right there. But it wasn't the warm breath of a normal person. It was an icy cold breath, causing my body to shudder in fear and cold. I took a deep breath, mentally debating with myself whether I should turn around. I tremblingly grabbed my phone and turned on the front camera. There was no one there. I sat up and looked around the room. Everything was the same. Feeling the icy atmosphere, I glanced at the air conditioner, noticing it was set to 61 degrees. I wondered if I had adjusted the temperature myself, or if someone else had. Could it have been a ghost? The third time, I groggily woke up to the sound of a door opening. I saw the shadow of a tall man standing at the computer desk across from me, staring at me. My heart jumped, but when I sat up, the figure had vanished. However, when I looked toward the room door, it was indeed open. I felt confused and suspicious about everything around me, about my perceptions and senses. I took my own horrifying experiences and wrote them into a story on the blog. Everyone found it fascinating, and there was even a lively discussion in the comment section. One reader mentioned that ghosts often appear at 3 a.m., and suggested that I try some of these experiences and tell them about the authenticity of those encounters. Well, at first I was very frightened and was against the idea. I truly wanted to escape this haunting feeling. But I nonetheless skeptically followed through. The next day, I didn't sleep. Right at 3 a.m., I went on to open both windows. Outside was a dark and silent space. Suddenly, a foul odor resembling that of a corpse filled my nose, making me nauseous. But as I intended to return to bed, that stench immediately gone. Footsteps could be heard just outside the hallway, accompanied by the woeful crying of a woman. I leaned against the wall and stared at the door. The footsteps and cries disappeared after a few minutes. Afterward, I took a deep breath, calmed down, and moved toward the door. I looked through the peephole on the door. My heart raced violently against my chest. A tingling pain pierced through my chest. There was nobody outside. Since the view through the peephole was limited, I took the risk to open the door to extend my angles. I stepped outside. The long hallway was quiet and clean as it had been freshly cleaned that afternoon. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered on and off, and the footsteps and cries of the woman emerged again. I quickly went back inside but didn't understand, then noticed that the door had closed behind me. The fingerprint recognition didn't work, and when I resorted to use the password, the incorrect password notification kept ringing. Helplessly gripped the doorknob, I shook it vigorously to no avail. I yelled out in fear and despair. A hand suddenly slammed down on my shoulder, causing me to panic even more and scream even louder. The security guard of the apartment building approaching demanded that I keep quiet. Looking around, everything had returned to normal, and with the security guard present, I felt like I had found my life back. I explained the crying of the woman, the hallway lights malfunctioning, and the apartment door being stuck. He didn't believe me and told me to try opening the door again. This time it worked as normal. The security guard threw a disgruntled look at me. I frantically apologized to him and went inside the house. Looking at the clock, it was almost 4 a.m., and although I still couldn't breathe normally after all that happened, yet I realized there was nothing too life-threatening dangerous, so I took another bold step to try yet another experience. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I intended to leave. Suddenly, a shadow glided in and stood right behind me. The figure slowly turned to look directly into the mirror. It was me, but without any eyes. The skin was as pale as a corpse. It opened its empty, dark mouth wide agape in a horrifying manner and lunged straight at me. I didn't have time to react. The last thing I could feel was a force impacting my head, pushing me forward. My head slammed hard against the mirror, bleeding profusely. I rushed out of the bathroom, turning on all the lights in the house. I sat in the living room, trying to open my eyes wide to remain alert. I called my best friend Otis and recounted everything. He laughed, thinking that writing horror stories had led me to hallucinate. But upon seeing my genuine distress, Otis grew concerned and agreed to stay with me for a few days. It took me nearly a week to calm down completely. Yet I couldn't explain the terrifying things I had experienced. I was also unsure about the existence of ghosts or mysterious supernatural forces, but I was sure I would never recklessly engage in those forbidden acts again. Has anyone ever had any experiences like mine? Please share your story in the comments. My name's Brad, and the worst thing that ever happened to me was 10 years ago. At that time, I was 19, that age when I was pretty full of myself and overly confident. I didn't go the usual route of studying. Instead, I jumped straight into work right after high school. My first job was as a cashier at a store that sold toys and event decorations. It was around Halloween, and the weather in Colorado was freezing. The store was packed with decorations in all sorts of strange shapes and colors. Even though I saw them every day, I couldn't help but get startled whenever I glanced up at the display shelves. At 8 p.m., I had plans to meet up with some friends at a bar near the store. After spending over 4 hours enjoying music and drinks, I walked home alone. The alcohol just made me feel warmer, and I was still sober. I took a shortcut home that would save me about 10 minutes. The shortcut was always dark and deserted, no matter where you took it. I could smell a bit of mold and the lingering scent of burnt cigarettes. The air was gloomy and cold, and there were occasional eerie noises that would startle even the bravest people. It'd be a lie to say I wasn't scared, but I was pretty confident in my youthful strength at the time. My immature thinking made me believe I could handle it. This wasn't the first time I'd taken a shortcut home. Halfway through the shortcut, I was startled to see a tall black shadow in the distance. But after a few seconds, I just kept walking at my normal pace. As I got closer, my panic grew because the person had a really unusual face. I couldn't believe how the messy features were arranged on the face, along with the orange skin. After taking a few more steps, I realized that face looked really familiar. Wasn't that the mask on sale at the store where I work? I was so tired that I just ignored him and hurried home. "Hey, can I bum a cigarette off you?" He came up to me and said. It didn't sound like a teenager's voice. I shouldn't have gotten involved with that guy. I didn't smoke, so I shook my head and kept walking. But the guy laughed loudly and followed me, making annoying humming noises and singing some really irritating songs. I turned around and shouted, "Get lost before I hurt you." I thought that would scare him off. But looking back, I really wish I'd known how to stay calm and handle things wisely, like a 29-year-old when I was 19. He laughed loudly, a joyful laugh that was also full of anger. I could really feel it. He slowly pulled out a small knife with a long blade and a really sharp tip from his pocket. "Let's see if you can back that up," he growled at me, then burst into a loud, joyful laugh. At that moment, my survival instinct kicked in and I ran. The guy was really fast, even though he was wearing a long, thick cloak. The crazy laughter and the sound of the knife scraping against the pavement as he ran and dragged it. I ran into a small alley. Even though I was exhausted, I tried to control my breathing as calmly as possible. Of course, I wanted to call the police, but breathing was so hard that using the phone seemed impossible at the time. The quiet night was so still that any movement would risk the monster smelling me and coming to get me. I heard footsteps getting closer and clearer, and it seemed like he knew exactly where I was hiding. The guy seemed to be toying with my endurance, and his laughter was so loud and grating it felt like it was hurting my eardrums. The footsteps were just a wall away from me. "This is my place, kid. Get lost and laugh while you can." It was the homeless old man. I recognized him because I'd met and talked to him a few times before. The man was still laughing loudly. I looked out to check what was going on. It felt like a scene from a horror movie was playing out right in front of me. The guy laughed maniacally while swinging the knife around wildly. The blade, his hand, the mask, and the road beneath his feet. Everything was stained red. The homeless old man fell, and I knew for sure he was dead. My mind realized this was my chance to escape, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I kept running, stumbling, and crawling on the road. I couldn't let myself stop because my life depended on it. Thank God I made it to the nearby police station. I shouted loudly to get the attention of the police inside. Just a few steps from the police station entrance, I felt a knife slash from my shoulder down to my waist. But I didn't stop or turn around. I just shouted even louder. I collapsed to the floor, leaving footprints in a crimson liquid that made everyone panic. The man rushed into the police station, his eyes wide and darting around frantically, searching for me. The police hit him with 5 tasers. His hand, still sticky with red liquid, gripped the knife tightly and waved it at me before he finally collapsed. I was rushed to the emergency room and ended up with 30 stitches in my back. The man's identity was quickly revealed. It was Martin. He'd been in and out of prison dozens of times for causing trouble and stealing. In court, he cried and begged for leniency, claiming he was high on drugs at the time. But there's no law that gives leniency to a murderer just because they were high on illegal drugs and lost control. I was also called in multiple times to give a full account of what I saw regarding the death of the homeless old man. He saved my life. The doctors noticed a strong smell of alcohol on my breath when I was taken to the emergency room. So what I said might not have been entirely trustworthy to the police. I narrowly escaped death and learned a lot from that horrific night. I cherish the life I have, stay calm, and carefully think through my words and actions. Especially, I don't stay out past 11 p.m. anymore. I'm a freelance programmer, and I work online. One day I was scrolling through Facebook to chill after a few hours of work, and I stumbled on a post from some anonymous account. "I just killed someone. What should I do now?" It's a super short sentence, but it got a ton of reactions, including mine. I totally cracked up when I saw the post, and after checking out the comments, I realized the author really knows how to make an impact. I dropped a comment to get in on the joke. "Go grab a knife, like a really sharp, good one." A bunch of people laughed at my comment. "How cool," I said to myself and got back to work. That evening, I was in bed messing around on my phone when I got a notification saying someone replied to my comment. The OP replied to my comment. "I got a knife like you said. What now?" I shot back. "Break it down like those Hannibal horror movies? And then what do you do with them? Just wait for the garbage truck to roll up. Or maybe enjoy it." I cracked up at my own comment. Everyone thought the man was just kidding. After that, I have no idea when I knocked out. The next day, I hung out with friends and didn't get back until late afternoon. Thinking about yesterday's post, I was curious and went to check it out. The author confirmed he wasn't joking. "I did what you said, and the results blew my mind." I suddenly got a shiver. My mind flashed to a scary image of a dismembered body, and I realized I was basically consulting on how to pull off that crime. I closed the social media app, fired up my favorite music, and hopped in the shower. But it felt super weird. I didn't even know what I was feeling at that moment. My body was just really anxious and restless. I couldn't shake off that article, so I logged back in right after I finished showering. If you don't believe it, just check out the foot of the Mackinac Bridge. A black bag's gonna be there at 10 p.m. tonight. He also dropped a link to a map showing how to get to the Mackinac Bridge below the post. A lot of people were still laughing at that post, but I was kinda half believing it. The bridge was less than a mile from my place. I had been mentally struggling for like 4 hours. My mind was getting torn apart by curiosity, doubt, and fear. In the end, curiosity won out. I got up, changed my clothes, and bounced out of the house. When I got to the foot of the Mackinac Bridge, my heart started racing. I looked around, and sure enough, I spotted a black bag in the distance. The closer I got, the harder it was to breathe. But right then, my sense kicked in. My feet kept moving even though fear was tightening up my chest. I reached out to open the black bag, and I started gasping. The thing inside started to show, but it was black and hard to make out. Something fell out from inside, and I jumped back, screaming like crazy. "A piece of plastic!" I shouted when I finally saw what it was. Inside the black bag was a bunch of scraps. I kicked the piece of plastic hard and turned to leave, feeling kinda ashamed and a bit bitter for letting some random person pull me along like that. When I got home, I quickly pulled up the article, ready to call out that scammer. But the article was gone. I muttered some curse words and went to bed feeling frustrated. A few days later, while I was browsing online, the anonymous account dropped a post. What to do with such a tall and fit body? This time, there was a video with the article. That was me, standing at the foot of the Mackinac Bridge that evening when I opened the black bag. So there was a camera in that bag. I reported it to the police right away, and while I was waiting for the investigation results, I ended up dropping almost 8 pounds. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep well, and couldn't concentrate on work. I had no idea what the account owner was going to pull next on me or someone else. I wasn't sure if this was just a joke or if it was some crazy scheme. If it was just a prank like that black bag at the foot of the bridge, then this jerk really knows how to freak people out. I'm Joe, and back then I was 14 years old with a best friend named Victor. At that rebellious, energetic, and curious age, Victor and I came up with all sorts of mischievous pranks. One afternoon, when we had no school, we decided to ride our bikes into the forest behind the school. We didn't dare venture deep into the forest, even though we always intended to. We even teased and dared each other about it. That afternoon, for some reason, Victor and I decided to venture deeper than the spot where we usually played tricks. We agreed to follow a straight path only, to avoid getting lost. Deep in the forest, the trees were much denser and more overgrown, creating a sense of both fear and curiosity for mischievous kids like us. The sky began to show signs of rain, with dark clouds appearing alongside gusts of wind. Victor and I became even more excited. We weren't in a hurry to head back as we enjoyed playing in the rain. I was slightly startled when I saw something resembling a human shape staring at us from a distance. Noticing that the figure wasn't moving, Victor and I approached to take a closer look. It was a human statue, made of concrete and still very new. Victor and I touched the statue with amusement. Interesting. A statue like this in the forest, Victor exclaimed. It's the same size as us, look, I said, standing next to the statue and comparing my height to it. Look at its scared expression, Victor said, standing next to the statue and mimicking its expression, making us both laugh loudly. Victor, why does a statue feel warm? I wondered, after placing my hand on the statue's stomach. Victor hadn't had a chance to react when I exclaimed, "Wait a minute, I recognize this. Victor, it's a classmate of mine." Victor looked at me with a doubtful expression. "I'm pretty sure he hasn't been to school for 2 days." A chilling, terrifying feeling enveloped us, and the eerie atmosphere made us freeze for a few seconds, staring at each other. "Joe, do you see it?" Victor pointed behind me with a look of astonishment. Behind a large oak tree, 2 hands were gripping the trunk, suggesting someone was hiding behind it. We slowly approached, and behind the oak tree was another statue, this one positioned as if it was hugging the trunk tightly. Victor stood frozen while I mustered enough courage to approach and take a closer look. After all, it was just a statue, or so I thought. "Joe!" Victor shouted loudly, causing me to jump. "This is the older brother of my neighbor." I immediately stepped back, looking at the statue, which had an expression of pain and despair. At the left elbow, there was a crack in the cement, and a horrifying smell of decay wafted up as the storm arrived. Victor and I looked at each other, both of us understanding the gravity of the situation. Victor, in sheer terror, turned and ran away. I had never seen him run so fast. I ran after him, calling out loudly, but Victor didn't look back and soon disappeared behind the trees. I wasn't fearless, in fact. My fear was even greater than Victor's, to the point where I couldn't run fast. I heard cries and pleas from behind after running a fair distance, but I didn't dare look back, unsure if the sounds were real or just my imagination. When I returned to the original spot, I still saw Victor's bicycle standing there. Not thinking much, I quickly jumped on the bike and pedaled fast back home. The rain began to pour heavily, obstructing my view, and I could only pedal as fast as possible. I navigated the bike by mentally mapping out the familiar path, as my eyes couldn't stay open from the rain. My parents were very angry when they saw me come home in such a state. I was terrified and trembling, unable to speak. About 20 minutes later, after calming down, I recounted the entire incident, and my father immediately called the police. That evening, the whole neighborhood was stunned as the police moved the 2 statues out of the forest. Victor's mother ran to my house in a state of panic, asking because she hadn't seen him since the afternoon. I felt like electricity was coursing through my body. I had forgotten about my friend. I recounted the events to the police, and in my fear, I began to cry. Victor's bicycle was found, but he was not. Witnessing Victor's parents' suffering, I have always felt that I am partly responsible for this incident. The perpetrator has still not been found, and there are no clues about him. The motive and purpose behind his actions remain unknown. The police set up a checkpoint at the edge of the forest after the incident to continue investigating and searching for Victor and the perpetrator. At the same time, they issued a law prohibiting residents from entering the forest. My mental state was severely affected after the incident. Whenever I recall that moment, I can't help but wonder, was the pleading cry actually Victor calling out to me?